I received a game key for Ebola Village from Axyos Games Entertainment for review purposes. Ebola Village is a first-person survival horror game developed and published by Indie Game Studio. It originally launched on PC on May 13th of 2025, before making its way to PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, Xbox platforms, and Nintendo Switch on January 23rd of 2026. The game is the fourth main entry in the Ebola series, following Ebola, Ebola 2, and Ebola 3, alongside a short film that ties directly into the events of Ebola Village. The series wears its inspirations on its sleeve, especially when it comes to classic Resident Evil, from color-coded key items and locked progression paths to hulking enemies wielding chainsaws. The influence is obvious. Ebola Village has drawn attention largely because of its surface-level similarities to Resident Evil Village, though the experience ultimately feels much smaller in scope and far rougher around the edges.
С вами была ведущая новостей канала ЦРТ Татьяна Васильева. Благодарим за внимание. До свидания.
Что за пиздец? Сегодня вроде не 1 апреля. Последние 3 года творится полное дерьмо. Иногда мне кажется, что я сплю.
You play as Maria, who is watching television in her rundown apartment when she learns that a virus created by the Panicum Company has spread to her home village in Russia, where her mother and ex-husband still live. She travels there to check on them, only to find the area overrun by infected villagers and grotesque creatures. From there, the narrative mainly exists to push you through different locations, including a graveyard, a swamp, a farm, and several residential areas as Maria searches for key items, survives encounters with monsters, and attempts to save what remains of her family. The story does not try to be deep or surprising, but it provides enough context to justify the journey. Gameplay sticks closely to traditional survival horror design. You explore compact environments, gather weapons, ammunition, healing items, and keys, and frequently run into obstacles you cannot progress past until you find the correct item later. This often means backtracking through familiar areas once new paths open up. You will be doing things like repairing a bridge by fighting wooden boards, or tracking down a bottle of vodka to sober up a drunk hanging out in the village. The village itself is small but well connected, giving the game a tight and focused feel. It ends up feeling like a condensed version of a Resident Evil experience. It keeps the pacing brisk and rarely ever gets boring. Puzzles are simple but effective, occasionally requiring you to read notes, rotate objects, or find hidden code combinations.
Придется найти этому идиоту бутылку водки.
The item and inventory systems are clearly modeled after genre staples. Healing is handled through mint plants that function almost exactly like the Resident Evil herb system, with different colors restoring varying amounts of health, and combinations offering full recovery. Tools like bolt cutters allow you to break chains, and a shovel is required to dig up a grave for progression. Broken items must sometimes be combined to create a usable version, and backpacks can be found to expand your limited inventory space. The game is short, with a standard playthrough easily finishing under 4 hours, and it can be completed much faster if you know where to go. That shorter length works in its favor, as it keeps repetition from becoming too noticeable. That said, Ebola Village is far from polished. There is a noticeable amount of jank throughout the experience. Enemies can sometimes hit you without any clear contact. Zombies will occasionally clip through doors, and reused assets are very common. The presence of generative AI elements is also noticeable enough to feel disappointing. These issues can be distracting, but they never fully derail the experience. Despite the rough edges, the core gameplay loop is genuinely enjoyable. The exploration flows well, the objectives are clear, and the game consistently moves forward. If you enjoy lower-budget horror games that prioritize feel and familiarity over refinement, there is still fun to be found here.
Убить ее! О, свежее мясо! Свежее мясо! Режьте ей голову!
Visually, the game does a solid job establishing mood. The village environments lean heavily on muted browns and grays, which help sell the bleak, decaying atmosphere. There are some surprisingly strong gore effects during combat, with enemies reacting convincingly to gunfire, including faces being torn apart or bodies collapsing in dramatic ways. At the same time, this realism can clash with technical oddities, such as floating eyeballs or exposed skulls that seem to hover unnaturally after damage. Environmental detail is generally strong for the scope of the game, though character models tend to look awkward and stiff. Voice acting is passable but clearly limited, and while it stands out at times, it rarely becomes actively distracting, though certain tracks, especially the music used in the church, stand out as genuinely effective. Ebola Village is an uneven but enjoyable survival horror experience. It borrows heavily from better-known games and does little to hide its influences, but it still manages to be fun to play. The technical flaws, reused assets, and lack of polish are impossible to ignore, yet the tight level design and familiar mechanics keep the experience engaging from start to finish. While it is not a standout horror title, it is arguably the strongest entry in the Ebola series so far. For fans of Resident Evil style gameplay who do not mind a rougher, smaller scale indie release, Ebola Village is a solid, if imperfect, ride. I give Ebola Village a 6 out of 10.